Good evening, everyone. We left off on page 203. "Kerry," he said once, his voice strong and his tone warm. "Right here," she said. She walked out from the dressing room, wearing her silky white bridal outfit, a modest but elegant blouse, coupled with a pair of flowing pants designed to look like a dress when she stood still. He was dressed in a black tuxedo, a red flower donning his right lapel. "You look amazing," he said with a wide smile. "And your mother was worried the suit wouldn't look as good as a dress. Was she ever wrong? It's you, Kerry. It's perfect." Kerry blushed. "Thanks," she said, smiling up at him. "You look just as amazing, handsome." She placed a hand on his jacket, feeling the smooth material. It fit him perfectly. Her parents had paid for everything, including everyone's clothing. Of course, they hadn't been able to have a very extravagant wedding. The fact that Connor's parents weren't around to chip in for half of it made their budget considerably smaller. But that was alright with Connor and Kerry. Neither one of them liked frills anyway. "Are you still sure you don't want to do this on a roller coaster?" he asked her with a mischievous smile. "Of course I do, but my mother would have a conniption," Kerry answered, her grin just as mischievous. "Come on, let's go get married." "Let's," she agreed, and they walked off together into the chapel. Scene change. Suddenly, they weren't in the church any longer. They were in the hospital now. Kerry's torso sported a dashing white bandage instead of a bridal outfit, and she recalled the all-too-familiar feeling of the ripping pain in her back. The morphine level increased and went directly to the area where the nerves were causing her pain, and her discomfort eased. Connor held her hand, waiting for her to wake up. He didn't realize she was already awake, because his eyes were starting to droop, and his grip was loosening. How long had he been here? "Hey there," she said with a smile, looking at him. His eyes shot open, and he made eye contact instantly. "Hey," he greeted with a warm smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm on morphine," she said, half joking, half serious. "Well, I've got an explanation for that," he said softly, still smiling as he indicated the automatic morphine drip. "Do you remember what happened?" "Unfortunately," Kerry said, sighing and looking up at the ceiling. "I'm not having a very good day, am I?" "Try not having a very good 2.5 days," he said. "You've been out for a while." Kerry tried to hide the shock from her eyes. "Really? I surely hope you've gone to the bathroom in that time." "That's all I left for," he answered truthfully, still smiling at her. "God, I'm just so glad to see you awake." The relief came through loud and clear in his voice. The doctors had said she'd be fine, and as soon as she woke up they could start making progress and talk about physical therapy. But there was still the nagging fear that she wouldn't wake up, that she would go into shock again, and he'd lose her this time. She squeezed his hand, and smiled. He looked exhausted. She held out her arms to hug him, and ignored the pain that shot up her torso at the exertion. He hugged her as gently as he possibly could, and held her for a moment. A single tear slid down his cheek when he closed his eyes. "Why are you crying?" she asked him quietly, as they released each other, and Connor sat back down. He chuckled and shook his head. "You have no idea what hell you've put me through in these last 60 hours. She smiled slightly and said, "Well, then I'll just have to make it up to you." "Just get better," he told her. "That'll be enough." Scene change. Kerry awoke to a bang, and jumped, thinking at first that it was a gunshot. But she turned her head and saw that the little boy next to her had just knocked over his chair. He looked at Kerry, seeing that he had disturbed her. He scrambled up from the floor and shyly righted the chair. He sat back down and turned his attention to the television once more. Kerry rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and looked at her watch. They had been asleep an hour. She had been asleep an hour. 1 down, 2.5 to go, she thought. She took a drink of water and looked up at the TV. It was the same cartoon, the same dialogue. She looked curiously at the little boy. He was mouthing each word and laughing at all the same jokes he had before. It had to have been a recording, she thought. That is, Mother? Brought with her to keep him busy? Kerry didn't care what was on the television, but she wondered how anyone, even a little boy, could enjoy watching the same episode for such a long period of time. She got up and decided to try her luck at the front desk. The receptionist didn't even look up at her as she approached, but she appeared to be very busily filling out a form. "Excuse me." "Yes, how can I help you?" the receptionist asked, still filling out the form on the electronic pad. "My husband's name is Connor O'Malley. I wondered if he was still in surgery." The receptionist put the pad aside and went to her computer. She looked up the name and then said, "Yes, he is. Do you have any questions, Mrs. O'Malley?" Kerry shook her head. "No, I was just wondering." If you have any questions, I can have someone come down and answer them. Do you know where the cafeteria is? Yeah, there's a sign. Kerry pointed to a sign down the hall to the left. The receptionist nodded. Anything else? No, thanks. If you have any more questions or concerns, I'm here until 1800. She picked up her pad and began filling out the form again. Kerry walked away. She sat back down at the table and heard her stomach growl. The little boy turned his head. He heard that too, and he stared curiously at Kerry. She got up again and walked over to the vending machine. She bought a bag of cheese snacks. She had seen them in the kids' snack drawer before. Again, she sat back down at the table and pulled up a news page on her phone. Explosion kills 2, injures 1. The subheading read, Police still searching for bomber. She started to read the article. Yesterday afternoon at 17:30, CSI Lieutenant Kerry O'Malley and CSI Greg Banning turned off of Butterfield onto Eola Road and then onto a side road to discover a stolen vehicle. They collected fingerprints, called in to have the vehicle airlifted back to the Chicago Crime Lab, and the helicopter barely got in position above the vehicle before an explosion ripped through the air. The helicopter ignited into flames, and the CSIs dove to the ground. Kerry looked up when she heard someone breathing nearby. She saw the little boy near her, looking at the bag of cheese snacks. Want one? She asked him. He looked scared to respond. Kerry smiled at him. It's okay. I'm a police officer, see? She showed him her badge briefly, before clipping it back to her on her belt. I seen you before, he said. Kerry raised an eyebrow. She usually remembered the families of victims. Who was this little boy? Really? Where have you seen me? She asked, putting the phone down. The boy shrugged. I seen a whole lot of you. Oh, he meant police officers in general. Oh, okay, Kerry said kindly. Would you like a cheese? She looked at the package. Cheese yum? Uh-huh, he answered, and took one out of the package for himself. He ate it eagerly. When was the last time you ate? Kerry asked, looking behind her to see that his supposed guardian had fallen asleep. I dunno, he responded. You look sad, he said suddenly. Kerry forced herself to smile slightly. I'm sorry, she said. Just have a lot to think about, that's all. Me too, he told her. He took another cheese snack. When's dinner? Kerry looked at her watch. Not for a while yet. It's just past lunch. Oh, he said, clearly disappointed. He took yet another cheese snack. Kerry passed the bag over to him when he retracted his hand. You can have them. Actually, here, come on over here with me. The boy followed her to the vending machines, and Kerry said, You can have anything here you want. His eyes lit up. Really? He was skeptical. Kerry smiled and said, Sure, go ahead and pick something out. He couldn't make up his mind. He ran from vending machine to vending machine, and just when he thought he had decided, he changed his mind once more. Kerry resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Every fiber in her body told her that she didn't have time for this, that Connor needed her right now, and she couldn't be standing here waiting for someone else's 5-year-old to decide what snack he wanted. But she reminded herself that she really couldn't do anything until her team had processed that crime scene, and until Connor was out of surgery. She was stuck. I want that, he said, and pointed to a huge bag of chips. It was the most expensive thing in all of the vending machines, and Kerry said, That's not very good for you. But I want it. Kerry sighed. All right, here you go. She waved her card over the payment reader and reached in and pulled the bag of chips out. Go to town. He looked at her, confused. It means you can go ahead and start eating, she explained with a smile. She walked back over to the table and sat down. He sat across from her. Uh-oh, I've made a friend for life, she thought. He crunched down on a chip, and when he had gotten it to small enough pieces, he said, I'm David. Who are you? I'm Kerry, Kerry answered him. Hi. Hi, she smiled. He was a cute little kid. What are you here for? My brother, he said. Ah, she answered. Is that your mummy? Nope, he said. Who is she? I don't know, he answered. Kerry looked concerned. You mean you've never met her before in your life? Uh-huh, he said. Well, who brought you here? My brother. Does your brother work here? Uh-uh, David shook his head. Nope. How did you get here, David? In a big white truck. I'd never been in one before. The man in the back didn't see me because I snuck on. He snuck onto an ambulance? It was much too crowded for that. The paramedic had to have seen him. Did someone show you to this waiting area? Uh-huh, a lady. Did the lady have one of those special shirts on? Kerry asked, pointing to a doctor walking by with the scrubs. Uh-huh. Where did the lady go? She stayed here, then her phone went beep beep beep, and she left. He shrugged, puzzled, and ate more snacks. Kerry frowned. Come on over here, David. You can bring your food. Is your cartoon still in the video player? It's not mine. Okay, she said. Follow me. And he did. They walked up to the receptionist's desk again, and Kerry noted that the little boy was invisible behind the counter. Excuse me. Yes, may I help you? This little boy right here, she pointed downward, and the receptionist had to rise from her seat to see him. She nodded. David Oppley. His brother's in critical condition. So you know about him. He's just sitting in the waiting area all alone. He hasn't had anything to eat. I think he needs some supervision. We're keeping an eye on him, Mrs. O'Malley. You have to understand, we're very busy here. Kerry noticed that David was no longer listening. He was concentrating only on his chips. What happened to his brother? I can't disclose that information to non-family members, I'm sorry. Kerry frowned and pulled out her badge. She showed it to the receptionist and clipped it back to her belt. Is this a criminal investigation? The receptionist asked. No, I just want to make sure this little boy is safe. He's safe with us. He's hungry. He doesn't look hungry to me, she countered, leaning over to see the little boy munching away on chips. Look, officer, we have this situation under control. Kerry did not bother to correct the receptionist that she was lieutenant and not officer. Have you notified his parents? We can't seem to get a hold of them. Then how is this situation under control? How long has he been waiting here? His brother was brought in last night. He's been here since last night, and you still can't find his parents? Officer, please, we have the situation under control. If you'll just go back to the waiting room, we'll contact you as soon as your husband's out of surgery. Kerry looked at David. Don't you have a daycare or something here? We do, but he can't be enrolled without a guardian, and social services has been called, but hasn't shown up yet. They're completely backed up. A representative told me their computer system has crashed. They said they'd be down as soon as they can. And that was last night. Look. Excuse me? Kerry turned to find a man in a suit, carrying a folder. His ID tag said Social Services. Is this David Oppley? It is, the receptionist said, relieved. Officer O'Malley and I were just talking about him. David, my name is Ben. He knelt down to the child's eye level. I'm here to get you something to eat and some new clothes. How about it? I want to stay with Kerry, David said. Lieutenant Kerry O'Malley, Kerry introduced herself, extending her hand to the social services agent. Ben Hauser, Social Services. Pleasure to meet you, Lieutenant, he said. I'm here to take David into protective custody. We can't seem to contact his parents. I want to stay with Kerry, David repeated, and grabbed Kerry's hand, hiding behind her. Kerry looked back, and then looked at Ben, who stood up. I heard you're pretty backed up. She realized it was likely the Diablo infiltration that had led to this mess, and she felt partially responsible for David's lack of care. Yeah, someone crashed the system yesterday. We've had to clear all of our child services agents manually before they could go out on the field again, because there was an infiltration 2 days ago. Hey, weren't you on the news the other day? Briefly, Kerry answered, not wanting to get into this now. Right after the car bombing off of Butterfield. You know, everyone was thinking that was a terrorist attack for a while there. Kerry nodded and changed the subject quickly. About David. I'm going to be here for at least another 2.5 hours. I could keep an eye on him. Ben pulled out his phone and tapped his schedule. Looks like I can be here in 3 hours to pick him up. Are you sure you can't stay another half hour with him? I actually don't know. My schedule's a little up in the air right now. She really didn't want to leave this little boy to leave. For some reason, he made her just feel slightly more comfortable, if that was possible. She frowned and said, How about this? I'll stay with him as long as I can, and then you can pick him up from the waiting area. Miss... She looked at the receptionist's name tag. Miss Wellington should be here until 1800, correct? The receptionist nodded. Okay, then you can keep an eye on him for the half hour I'm not here. Sound good? She asked Ben. Yeah, that should work. Okay, David, you can stay with Kerry for another couple hours, and then I'm going to come and get you something to eat and some new clothes to wear. And we can get dinner, too. I know a place with really good pizza. Okay, David agreed. He still didn't come out from behind Kerry, though. Okay, David agreed. He still didn't come out from behind Kerry, though. All right. See you later, David, he said. He walked away, and Kerry turned to the little boy. Let's go back to the waiting room, okay? Okay, David said, and brought his bag of chips with him. Kerry smiled. He reminded her of her boys when they were his age. It wasn't that long ago. Only a year ago for Aiden. She sat down and looked at the repeating cartoon. I think it's on a loop setting. It's always the same one, David told her. I know. Do you want to watch something else? No, David said. He actually didn't want to watch TV now that Kerry was here. Okay, Kerry agreed. They were silent for a moment before David asked her, Have you ever been to the beach? Yes, I have, Kerry answered. I went once, David said. Brett and Mommy and Daddy and me. We had fun. What did you do at the beach? We built sand castles, and I got to go in the waves. They're really, really tall. Yes, they are, Kerry said with a smile. Do you know where the beach was? She wanted to get an idea as to where he was from, if his family was not from the area, and if he and his brother had possibly been kidnapped. Her mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. David shook his head, though. The beach, he said simply. Kerry chuckled. There's more than one beach. Really? Yes. Do you know what a continent is? David shook his head. It's a big, big piece of land on Earth. Most continents are surrounded by water. That's why there are so many beaches. David seemed to think about this. How many continents is there in the whole wide world? There are 7, Kerry told him. So there's 7 beaches. Kerry smiled. Well, there are islands, too. She thought about explaining countries' borders to him, but thought that it might confuse him. How many? A whole lot, Kerry answered. So it would be very hard to count how many beaches there are. Oh, David said, disappointed. Well, I've been to one of them. That's right, Kerry said with a smile. Brett's in surgery, too, David said suddenly, just like Mr. Kerry. He had connected that Kerry's husband must be Mr. Kerry, of course. That's too bad, Kerry said softly. She wished he hadn't brought this up. I know which surgery is, he said, eating another chip. It's when doctors take someone's insides and fixes them because they don't work right. That's right. The man in the white truck said Brett's insides don't work right. They used to work okay. Well, if the paramedic spoke to him, then he definitely didn't sneak on like he thought he did. I'm sorry to hear that. We were playing outside and a big truck came on our grass really fast. Kerry's eyes turned sympathetic. She had been at hit-and-run scenes before. Did you call 911? Uh-huh, on Brett's phone. I never get to use it, but he told me to. Then he fell asleep. The truck hurt him. Brett was watching you while your mummy and daddy were out? He was babysitting me. Ah, Kerry said. She was surprised you wanted to talk about it. He didn't show any immediate signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, it was still pretty soon after what had happened. It might not manifest until later. Why don't Mr. Kerry's insides work? David asked. Kerry started feeling the lump grow in her throat again. She beat it down and turned to David. He fell and hurt his head. Oh, David said. Do you know where my mummy and daddy are? I don't know. I'm sorry, David. Did a police officer talk to you about all this already? Uh-huh, last night. That's good. They'll figure out where your mummy and daddy are, and until then, Ben will take care of you. I want to see Brett. I can't help you there, sport. You'll have to wait until the doctors say it's alright for you to see him. Do you get to see Mr. Kerry? Only after a few hours, Kerry answered. She hoped to God she was right about that. Of course, she'd see him one way or the other. She sighed and rubbed her eyes with her thumb and index finger. Are you tired? She opened her eyes to see David leaning in, staring at her. Yes, Kerry answered. Are you? No, David told her. Did you stay up past your bedtime? Far past my bedtime, Kerry told him, smiling slightly. I stayed up past my bedtime, but I went to bed here, and a lady brought me a blankie. I miss my own blankie, though. It's at home. Brett says only babies have blankies, but I like my blankie. You're entitled to keep your blankie as long as you want, David, Kerry told him. My boys still have theirs. You have boys? Where are they? David wanted to meet them and play with them. He looked around the room for them, as if they would show up. They're at home, Kerry lied. It would be too complicated to explain why they were at the police station. Do they like planes? My oldest, Patrick, loves planes. He wants to be an astronaut when he grows up. Do you know what that is? Uh-huh. I want to be a pilot. I flew a lot of planes when I was younger. I was a pilot. Really? He asked, his eyes wide. Really, Kerry smiled. It was a lot of fun, but a lot of work too. It was a long time ago, though. How long ago? About 20 years ago. I'm 5, he said. That's more than me. That's about 4 of you, she told him with a smile. Wow, the astonished 5-year-old exclaimed. How old are you? She smiled at his innocent question. I'm 41. Wow, he said again. My mommy's 32, and my daddy's 34. They're old too. Kerry chuckled. I suppose they are. Brett's 12. He's old, but not as old as Mommy and Daddy and you. Kerry couldn't believe anyone would leave a 5-year-old boy alone with Kerry couldn't believe anyone would leave a 12-year-old boy alone with a 5-year-old, especially at night. She decided to change the subject. Do you like to draw? Uh-huh, David said, nodding eagerly. Why don't we see if we can't find a piece of paper, and I can show you how to draw a puppy? Okay, David agreed. That sounded like fun. It wasn't long before Kerry had a stack of paper, a mechanical pencil, and a bunch of crayons. The receptionist seemed to be willing to give Kerry and David anything if they would just leave her alone to work. They spent the next few minutes coloring, and Kerry attempted to draw quickly. Do you go to school, David? Uh-huh, David said. What school do you go to? Kindergarten, he said. Brett goes to 7th grade. He's bigger. Kerry smiled. He obviously didn't understand the question, but that was okay. Do you live close to here? I dunno, he answered. I know my address and my phone number. That's very good, Kerry said with a smile. Finally. That's very important to know. 305 North Morning Street, Naperville, Illinois, 60563, 630-509-5027, Oppley47 at skimline.com. Do you know yours? I do, Kerry answered. So David lived considerably close to the hospital, right here in Naperville. Did you ever move? I've moved a few times. Mommy and Daddy says we're going to move soon. We're going to move to a place called California. It's far away. Yes, it is. Do you know why you're moving? Daddy told me Mommy has a new job there. She'll be president. Ah, well that's good. It didn't sound like his parents had abandoned him, as presidents of companies generally didn't just up and leave their children. If they couldn't be found, something must have happened. Brett doesn't want to go. He probably doesn't want to leave his friends. David shrugged. I don't know. Do you remember where your mummy and daddy said they were going last night? Uh-uh. Did you see them leave? Uh-uh. Did Brett see them leave? I don't know. But Brett told you he was babysitting you. Uh-huh. It sounded like they had to leave at the last minute and only left the kids alone because they either couldn't find a babysitter fast enough or absolutely couldn't take them with them. Usually, people in high positions like David's mother had security around their house. There were less than friendly people out there, especially those who harbored ill will against anyone who made a lot of money. So you were playing in the yard when the truck drove onto your grass. Whose idea was it to play outside? Brett's. He said we should go outside until Mommy and Daddy got back home. Kerry frowned. Maybe there was a crime scene or something inside that the older boy didn't want David to see. Did you see who was in the truck, David? David shook his head. No. Did you see the license? Did you see the numbers on the back of the truck? No. He was getting agitated. He had already told this to the other police officers. He didn't want to tell it again. Okay, Kerry said, smiling. She planned to look into this little boy's case as soon as everything was settled. It was a welcome distraction from everything on her mind. They continued coloring. Kerry was pretty sure that an hour had passed, and she was eternally glad for this little boy's presence. The hour would have been torture if she hadn't had him to talk to. And he was quite content to talk about nothing in particular. Before Kerry knew it, her cell phone rang, and she excused herself from their conversation just for a moment. She stepped away and answered, "Justin, what do you have?" And we'll read more tomorrow.